Okay, so we are going to be going through approximately 20 things based on the traditions of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein for the Seder night. As many of those things, I spoke to Rabbi Mordechai Tendler, his personal assistant for over 10 years, who took notes on things that happen in the household of Rabbi Moshe. So I think a lot of it is very practical. This will be one of the most practical halachic shiurim you can have in terms of the night of the Seder. Okay? Get the premise? Very basic, very simple, and unfortunately going to cut away with a lot of the chumras that the people have for many things. And it's not that Moshe wasn't machmer. He certainly was in many areas. I'm just not going to cover those areas tonight. We can come back and look for them later. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is the start time for the Seder, because there's a famous rush that's brought down la halacha, and I don't really see anybody arguing with it, which is that we should start the 4 cups at the Seder after Seder Kochavim, after nightfall, halachic nightfall, we'll call 3 stars. The problem with that is that it makes for a very late start for the Seder, especially if you have young kids and if you have elderly people. And I was trying to find heterim for it in the year of COVID, and I looked into it. I didn't really deal adequately with it enough, other than to say that halachically, it's very hard to argue on somebody who gets accepted. Even if you say, well, the Rambam doesn't say it, the Rif doesn't say it, so the Rush is 1 of 3, so why do we have to listen to him? And there's arguments to be made, why does he get to decide this thing that wasn't said in the Gemara? But the bottom line is that you got to kind of leave the rush in its place, but work around. There's workarounds. So, for example, when I was in Australia, I was invited by somebody to help lead a Seder for the biggest old age home of Australia, which supposedly had 1,000 people in it. I don't really think there was 1,000 people at the Seder, but there were definitely hundreds and hundreds. It's not the biggest Seder I was at, but it was hundreds and hundreds of people. Now, the only problem with the Seder is that it started early. It ended late enough that I remember it was a very far walk. It was well over an hour walk, and I had to walk over an hour to get back to where I actually had the actual Seder. The question really is, and I didn't even know at that point, I didn't ask a Shaila, are these people being Yotze? Are they actually fulfilling their obligation for a Seder that starts well before Seder Kochavim? It finished after Seder Kochavim, but that was it. That was just the finishing. Definitely all the Arba Kosos were not the first 2 of the Kosot were before. The Matzah, I'm not sure. But maybe Afikomen, that's when that was already completely done. So it turns out that for an old age home, you could maybe arguably say you could start to as early as Plag HaMincha, so which is, again, that's the circumstance. So that's one thing. So there are heterim. You do want to make sure to eat the matzah at the very least when it's seit. Again, when exactly it's seit, there's more lenient shiurim about that, shittas about that as well. You could rely on the more lenient opinions of what seit are for, let's say, young children, for families with young children that are getting very antsy and are not going to be able to stay up to start a Seder at 9:30 at night. So what you could do there is you could start the preliminaries and time it so that by the time you get to Kiddush, it's a little after Shkia. And that's what really people who want to involve their young kids and it should do. There's no there's early and therefore, so let's say we're talking about the candle lighting now is 7:06. So in 2 weeks, what it will be 7:11 or something like that. So you might be able to a little bit after Shkia would be something like 7:35, 7:45. So a little bit after that, you could be Mako, and there's some shitas that have an early sate, and you'd be Yotze according to those shitas. So basically, you could start the preliminary part of the Seder, let's say 7:30 or even 7:15, and by the time you get to 7:40, you'll make Kiddush. But that way, if you only daven Ma'ariv at 8 o'clock, and then do Hallel at 8:30, and then get home at 9 o'clock, and then begin the Seder at 9:30, yeah, your kid's gonna fall asleep. So there are things you could do even with the rush in place that you could be Yotze, not according to Rabbi Tam, but according to the Shulchan Aruch Harav, and the Gra, and so on. So that was the advice on that front. Okay, that's number one. Again, we continue with number one into number two. What time can you daven Ma'ariv the first night? You can daven earlier. It doesn't have to be that you don't have to. There is no Indian. There are a few people who are machmir to try to daven after Tzeis in general, Chabad, for example. But if you're not Chabad, you don't have to do that. So you can daven Ma'ariv earlier and time it so that by the time you get home, it's going to be 7 o'clock or 7:15, let's say, and you'll set up for the Seder. And by the time you make Kiddush, 7:45, you'll still have participation of your children. Okay, what about the second night? So the issue with the second night is not, there's two issues. A lot of people think, oh, well, you can't prepare for the first night and the second night, but you can daven early. It's okay. It's okay. The thing is, what you can't do is you can't really do the Sfira Sa'omer too early. So you got two choices there. One choice is, you wait till a little bit after Shkia, and you count the Omer then. And if you want to be choshesh, if you want to be concerned for the stricter shitas of when Seister Chachavim is, so you can count again later without a bracha. Okay. Now, what about Hallel and Shul? Is there any to say Hallel at a certain point? No, you don't. You can say Hallel. It can be earlier. That's not an issue. That's number three. If you want to discuss something for another time, is why does Sfira Omer Dafka have to be when it's late, when it's dark out? But that's for another conversation. We'll get it after Pesach. Number four is we'll skip to Haseba. So we're required to recline for the four kosas, for the matzah, the korach sandwich, the afikomen, if you can during the course of the meal, not strictly required, but if you can. What about women? Are they required to recline today? The answer is yes. And it's the Mordechai already says that in our times, the women are considered important. I guess there was a time before the Mordechai. Mordechai is 800 years ago almost. There was a time before the Mordechai that wasn't necessarily the case in terms of how society respected women. But by the time of the Mordechai, so women are important because what it was considered is there was always a distinction between important women and unimportant women. So important women had certain powers and certain freedoms. So they acted like they were free. They had more power, so they would recline. As society progressed, we gave women more powers, more prestige. So all women became important. Interesting, if you look, strictly speaking, I was looking in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, there seems to be a backsliding. First, he quotes the Mordechai and says, today, the women should recline because they're all important. He says, however, we see the minhag has become not to recline because reclining today isn't the norm anyway. It's a Roman thing. It's not a societal thing. You don't go to the White House and Obama or Clinton or Trump or I'm saying them all. No discretion here. Are lying down on some gold couch, the gold toilet maybe, but not a gold couch, because that's not the way people show their power or their pleasure. It's just a thing they did in Roman times. But it's interesting. We carry on Roman minhagim. Jewish customs is more in touch with how ancient Romans lived than Rome is today. Because Judaism has this quality that we just, we take something and we hold on to it. We're not letting go, right? So they say, so why should a woman as important as she is have to recline? But today, women recline. That was 250 years ago. Now women recline because once reclining is the way of showing. We've established now what's been forgotten by Rome itself. We reestablished that reclining is a sign of chayrus. Understand? We've reestablished that. So therefore, since women, now it's a reality, women are important. Now it's a reality that the way we show freedom and power is by reclining on Pesach, so women recline. Absolutely. Okay, that was number 4. And in the house of Rabbi Moshe, the women absolutely recline. That's number 4. Number 5 is here's where we're going to get to the kulas, to the leniencies. What is a revius? Revius is a certain measurement. What the measurement is, it's up to debate. And here's a story, a controversy within the house of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein about what happened to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's Kiddush cup. Fascinating story. So it's known that Reb David wrote a sefer, that one of the things that the sefer talks about is how much of David Feinstein, Reb Moshe's son, how much is the shiur of a revius? It's an important issue. And he has a pretty big shiur. But Mordechai Tendler insists that the true shiur of Reb Moshe was much smaller, as testified by the size of the Kiddush cup that he had, that was approximately 3.1 ounces. And he feels, based on conversations with Reb Moshe and other factors, that Reb Moshe held that 1.6 fluid ounces is considered a robe revius, and which is a very, very small shiur in today's. The other smaller shiurim I heard was 2.1 ounces or 3 ounces, but just over 1.5 ounces. It's an extremely small shiur. So that's going. By the way, the Chafetz Chaim also had a small becher, and a lot of people thought they should hide those bechers because it looks bad for them, But really, they had a smaller shiur. They didn't have the big measurements we have. So some people think it's a shiur is 3 something ounces or 4 something ounces. So they end up with these big, bigger cups. We're going to talk about that soon. Now, number 6 is there's 2 ways to drink the cup of wine. One way to drink the cup of wine is to have most cups. Let's say this cup, it's probably about 7 ounces. Okay. So one way is to drink a revius. So let's say a revius is 1.6 ounces. Definitely robe revius is 1.6 ounces, according to Rabbi Moshe. So you drink a little under 2 ounces, you're good. And the rest of the cup is full. It's full almost to the top. Okay, that's one way. But I got the Rov Revius. Another way is to drink Rov Kos. Rov Kos would be 51% of the cup. And the third way is to just knock down the whole cup. Now, which one did Rav Moshe do? Did Rav Moshe drink just the Revius, the Rov Revius, Did he drink Rove Kos? Well, his Rove Kos would have just been a Rove Revius. It wouldn't have been more because it's such a small cup. Or did he drink the full cup? So he actually drank the full cup. And that's not just a personal preference, although he liked wine. He was sweet. He liked the sweet wine. But it was the preference that's brought down in Shulchan Aruch as one of the preferred. It's not required absolutely, but it's absolutely preferred if you can to finish the cup. Now that's a problem. I remember one day there was a guy who always came to shul on time. I lived in Santa Monica. Not only did he not come on time, one particular Pesach morning, he came at the very end of the davening, which is very unlike him. He was always one of the minion guys. So I said, I was a kid, so I didn't know you don't ask people, why are you so late? Do I do that now? I went over to the guy and said, why are you so late? He said, no, he said, you don't understand. He said, we had like these mugs. We didn't have cups. We had these big mugs, like 20-ounce mugs. And we drank each mug 20 ounces. So 20 ounces times 4. I said, we slept in. Right? So that's a problem when you have a 20-ounce. By the way, they have wine glasses now that take an entire wine bottle in one glass. So imagine you're a guy who keeps the chumrah brought down to have the full glass 4 times, four bottles of wine. That's going to be some hangover. I mean, you might die if you're not accustomed to it. Not all of us will die, but some of us will get pretty sick from that. So what do we do about that? So that leads us to number 7, which is we already learned that the shiur is much smaller than people assume it is. So really, the first thing you should do, what did I do after I heard this? You want to know what I did? I Googled 3.5-ounce cups. I got pretty close. I got a 4-ounce cup. Pretty. Rabbi Moshe also, by the way, paskins that you should really not use a disposable cup. You should use, that's why it's good to have a befer. Okay, so a lot of people are very makel in that psak. That's one of the chumras of Rabbi Moshe. They said we're not going to talk about Rabbi Moshe's chumras because he has chumras, but we're going to focus more on just the middle of the road here. Some people are makel and say, well, Rabbi Moshe was talking about probably a Dixie cup or a very cheap cup because when he was talking about it in the 60s, the disposable cups, they disintegrated after a couple of uses. Today, these disposable cups are not so disposable. They're hazardous for the environment. They're ruining our oceans. So this cup that I found, 4 ounces, looks like those new it's called stemless wine glasses. Very elegant. It's made for wine tastings, where you don't get a huge, a 6 ounce or 8 ounce pour. You get a 2-3 ounce pour. So it's a 4 ounce cup and it's on sale. And I ordered like 100 of them for the first Seder so that everyone will get their own little 4 ounce cup. So that's the first thing you do. Get the right cup. The second thing you do is you do mezigas hakos. Mezigas hakos means you mix. It used to be they would mix water into the wine. So it should be approximately 3% alcohol because the wine doesn't generally go above 12%, except for Binyamin's wine somehow. But generally speaking, they're finding that even ancient wine wasn't higher in alcohol. When they say stronger, it might have meant one of 2 things. Stronger than grape juice, or a very light, maybe they started making even lighter than it is today, or stronger, meaning it was heavier. They didn't put in the nitrates, the things we do to make wine come out more evenly and taste better. They didn't have those mechanisms, so the wine was harif. It had a certain boom to it. So they had to water it down for many reasons. One is that was what they drank. Barbarians drink wine the way we drink today. The only people who are left in the world who even know this are people who learn Shulchan Aruch. right? Nobody else knows. Historians know this. No one else knows these things. So what you really should be doing, and I did this naturally, is I was always mixing grape juice with wine to make sure I didn't get a bang knockout headache in the middle of the Seder, because I didn't always have those 4-ounce cups. And if you have, you knock down 3 cups like this of wine, you're gonna, you're 14 years old. You got to start a bar mitzvah. I'm saying, you're gonna get a big headache. So I always knew you gotta pace yourself, and you put in some grape juice. So what you do is, if it's, let's say, 12% wine, 12% alcohol content in your wine, you mix in 2/3 or 3/4, 3 to 1 to make it about 3% grape juice. And if it's 6%, you could buy a lighter version. Then you do half and half. So by that, if you're doing that, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up getting 3%. Let's either 2 ounces, which is a total of 2 times 4 is 8. So you'll be drinking 8 ounces. It'll be like drinking an 8-ounce of beer. Oh, you don't have to, but you can. You can. And a lot of people can't really drink that much wine. They're not used to it, and they don't have to. There's no reason to do it. In other words, if you like to drink wine without mixing it with water, grape juice, go ahead, please. But if you don't, there's no chiyuv at all to drink it in a way that's harmful, when that wasn't even what Chazal instituted. That's not some heter. Meaning, this is the actual way to do it. You want to drink like a barbarian? Okay, drink like a barbarian. But that's not al pi halacha. We're letting you because you enjoy it. You enjoy it, so go ahead, be a barbarian. But in Shulchan Aruch it says that's not really derech eretz. That's not freedom. So that means if you're still sensitive to the barbarianism that we now practice, you didn't become a barbarian. Everyone around you is a barbarian. They're drinking all the straight up wine, and you know what, you want to be like the Roman and Jewish. We're the same in some ways. Romans and Jews in drinking things, we agreed. Okay, the rest of the world went. The Germans won. They won the war when it came to drinking. They won the war. Okay, but we are reminded that there's still Roman ways of drinking. Go ahead and drink like that. Okay. You want to drink like the Germans? I prefer that way. The Italians would be horrified. Really? We should water down the wine? They're like, the Germans were right. The barbarians were right. Okay. So those are 2 things you could do to mitigate the factor of having these massive unnecessary hardships for people. Again, it depends who you are. You don't, meaning the average person who's well and healthy and has a good relationship with alcohol can tolerate that. But if that's not you, there's no obligation to make yourself sick. The other thing is, if you are an alcoholic, then just drink grape juice. We're just assuming you're not alcoholic. And it's just drink grape juice. You can also even dilute the grape juice to water it down if the sugar content of the grape juice is harmful for somebody who's sick. So there's really very few people. It'd only be somebody who's really sick in the hospital who can't have dolichosis. Find some way to do dolichosis. 4, yes. And that's not even full. It's really even half, or if necessary, just a revius, rogue revius, which is, like we said, just over 1.5 ounces. So really, if somebody is not well, they could have 1.5 ounces of very, very, light alcohol content or no alcohol content if they're not well, and they'll satisfy depending on how serious it is. Okay, so that's a little bit about. You see, a lot of times people don't know these things, so they end up with big headaches. Now, we're going to talk a little bit. I mentioned about drinking, giving kids to drink at the Seder. Now, again, I don't know what I can't speak authoritatively of what parents should do, but technically speaking, when you're bar mitzvah, you have a little bit of wine. Again, what does that mean? It means with all of the precautions that we already enumerated. 3%, 2 ounces times 4 equals, it's a beer basically. It's like giving a kid a beer, their first beer after their bar mitzvah. Okay, maybe not even that. Maybe what you do is you give them the first cup of wine there's a wine called Heuven. It's like a 6% wine. You give that to that half Heuven, half grape juice, and then you just switch over to all grape juice. So you're again, it doesn't have to be wine, but if there was ever a time to like turn your kid into a wino, it would be the four cups of wine. Now, God forbid to turn them into a wino. You would actually be teaching them to drink responsibly. You'd be very careful and meticulous that you didn't just let them keep pouring wine, even though it's sweet and stuff like that. And you would talk about the dangers of wine, and in a free society, how an adult can partake of wine in certain limited sense. Again, make sure to get the approval. If you're a rabbi running a community seder, I wouldn't advise this. I would just say grape juice in your own home. If you're under investigation, I wouldn't advise this. If you're going through a divorce, I wouldn't advise this. If you live in America, I wouldn't advise this. If you live in Israel, they have enough tzaras over there. I don't know what ask your local rabbi in Israel. Okay, talking about kids for a second. Let's stop for a moment. I will continue with the ins and outs of what type of wine, red versus white. But let's talk about something very important, which is how we deal with children, because the main focus of the Seder has to be the children. And it's either literally your children or figuratively, there's somebody who takes the place of a child. Even if you've got nobody but yourself, you have to ask yourself, like Manishtana, right? That's the whole point of the Seder, to do things that are different, to get the child to ask. And to quote Rabbi Brandwein, there are no answers without questions. There's no light without darkness. There's no redemption without exile. So that's the core of what we're trying to do, the atmosphere that we're trying to create in this kind of cosmic reactor that we're building or rebuilding, is that perfect atmosphere to create a question that requires an answer. Okay? And that's what the whole purpose of the night of the Seder is. It's Kana Ben Shal, Manishtana Halal. Here are the things that we're doing differently to get the child to ask. So because of that, that's what we started out really with the Zman, with the time, to be sensitive. By the way, in Shulchan Aruch, it says, start the Seder early. Again, how early? That was the conversation we already had. But don't diddle daddle. In fact, in Rabbi Moshe's household, the Seder went relatively quickly. It was pleasant, but they didn't do the complex Divrei Torah during the Seder. It might have been a vart, short little nugget, but the complexity was reserved for the dinner itself after the Seder. Okay. Now, what do you do with little kids? This would be, let's say, we'll start from ages 3, 4, and 5. So the answer in the home, that is, you give them treats. Every 20 minutes, you give them a different type of candy. And it's based on the Gemara that said you'd give them like roasted nuts. You just engage them and make it exciting for them to come back around. So they're up, and it's this thing. It's like there's a little girl in the shul that every time I see her, she tells me how late she stayed up for the Seder. Right? And she's what, 4 or 5? Ever since she could talk, she's talking about how late the Seder night was, right? So that's one thing you could do. So you could have chocolate and jelly beans and squishy candy and of course there's songs, and you get them a little pillow. And then they get a little older, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You involve them a little more. You ask them to bring something that they did in school, coloring book, arts and crafts they did, a little Dvar Torah they have. Again, also with the songs, obviously, Manishtana, you don't torture them too much with the Manishtana, but you involve them with that, obviously. And then 11 and 12, again, I'm not saying this is for everyone, but you do give them the arbakosas. I mean, you're always giving the kids, when they're old enough, 4 cups of grape juice. And then by the time they're bar mitzvah, you put a little bit of wine. If you feel if that's okay. Again, I don't know if that's, again, within a super measured way. Nobody should be giving a kid, a big cup of wine 4 times. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm literally talking about, you could literally give an ounce, or half an ounce over the course of 4 kosses that will come out to a total of 2 ounces, 3 ounces. As they get older, a little more. You add a little bit when they're 16, 17, a little bit when they're 19. By the time I was 19, I was drinking more alcohol at the Seder night than I'm drinking tonight. I could process it better. It wasn't like my parents were plying me with liquor. They just didn't stop me. That was enough. And obviously, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to really process. And we came through our own Egypt. We had a Holocaust. And we should talk about the miracles of being able to have survived the Holocaust. Meaning, I didn't share it enough with my kids, but I had a grandmother who was in a gas chamber 3 times. It didn't work, thank God. It's not like it worked and she miraculously, just walked through the wall, Superman style. It didn't malfunction. So I'm only alive because of that, the miracle of 3 times a gas chamber not working. So what are the stories of how we're each here, how our grandparents escaped from the Holocaust, if they're survivors, how they survived, if they got out, how they got out, how we rebuilt after homes and communities that we came from. So we should focus on the triumph of the Holocaust, how we built Eretz Yisrael, how a group of people who were totally devastated and so many of them murdered were able to get back up, and a few years later have a place to a dream that was only a dream for 2,000 years come to fruition. So when we're talking about the Seder, we could get into our own more current history, and then we could even talk about B'chol dar v'dar omdim aleinu l'chalosenu, how they're still trying to destroy us in every generation on October 7th. We could talk about, for example, it says that the Yareu Osana Hamitzrim, there's a great shot that says the V'yareya Osanu could be translated as the Mitzrayim tried to make us the bad ones, which is happening in the world right now. The whole plot of Hamas and Iran, very effective. Just as effective as October 7th. They knew what would happen, that thank God we're not sitting in Nazi Germany, and we have a government that would protect us. And they knew that they'd be somewhat successful, and the only way to do that is to employ military tactics that would inflict a civilian casualty, because that's inevitable, especially with the way they're embedded purposefully in that thing. I don't have to go through all of that conversation. But what's their goal? To condemn us in the eyes of the world, to create more anti-Semitism, and they're getting that. And it's so much worse than that. They're turning one Jew against another, because Jews are Rahmanim and Baishanim and Gomel Chasadim. Jews are compassionate people, so they can't take the idea that other Jews are inflicting harm, and they don't want to believe that it's for purely military reasons. They want to believe it's for vengeance. Look, there might be a few people who want vengeance, right? But it's not about vengeance. It's about protecting ourselves in a very brutal area that if you don't protect yourself, you know the consequences of that. The only reason why this didn't happen sooner is they're afraid of the consequences. Now they're suffering the consequences. But if we hate ourselves because the whole world is hating us, then we have to start all the way back in Egypt, which is where we are. Behold, dar badar, in every generation, they're ready and they're risen up again, the same way they've risen up in every generation. I don't know the reason. Jealousy. They hate God, maybe. Maybe they just hate God. They hate God, so they can't say anything against their own religion. Who was that who said they hate God? Hitler. We are God's agents, so if they think they can get rid of us, they could get rid of the world's conscience. That's one of the reasons. Look, there wouldn't have to be all this thing in the Middle East if they didn't know how effective it would be. How much people already hate Jews. How it would fall on such open-ended, if they knew that people would have yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit. And if you're a liberal and you can't talk about Palestinians, so then talk about how the Palestinians are the ones in Egypt. Okay. That's the only half joke. If that's what helps you, do a Palestinian Seder, maybe that'll help you understand. Look, there's for sure there's one of the it's the place in the world with so much suffering. Absolutely. The fact that it's self-inflicted, that they invited the people or created the chaos. That's part of the problem. Also, it's a cycle that they are clinging on to. We would love to let go of the cycle. I hope so. Unless we're the ones, we can't. No, we don't like peace. I'm saying that facetiously. We're peace-loving people. That's the problem. If we weren't peace-loving people, they wouldn't mess with us. Okay, so that's a little bit about we got to deal with today. We got to make it relevant for today. There's a million things that would make it relevant today. The main thing is listen to your children. The main thing is hear what's going on. The main thing is a deep time, not to answer until there is a question. So make sure you're hearing what the question is so you can answer the question. That's the key. Okay, next question. A little less subtle. Red wine versus white wine. So the answer, my friends, is if they're equal, the red is preferred. It's so sad. You know why? It says except. Oh, there's a verse that indicates that red has a preference. But It's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, except in a place where there's a blood libel. Then it's okay to have white wine. So sad, if that's in our code of law, I have to mention that. It doesn't have to be mavushal. If you have a reason for it to be it doesn't have to be non-mavushal. If you're in a situation where it would be less comfortable with non-mavushal wine, get mavushal wine. A big, easy way to enjoy more. If you happen to like white wine, and I particularly started liking white wine a lot. Doesn't mean I don't drink red. I don't enjoy red. I enjoy white equally. Sometimes better than red. Get a white and have a cup of white if that really will enhance your Seder. If that's really what you want. If you really want it, go ahead and do it. If you're doing it to save $5, if you really can't afford it, okay. But if you can afford it, spend the $5. Spend the $10 more. No, so then if she loves it, then you get it. It doesn't have to qualify as a red. Meaning, now one thing you don't do is you don't blend. You don't make, because it's a rich night. So I don't say, I like a white wine, but I want it to be red. I'll put in some red. I'll make it red. No, if you want white, enjoy the white. You want a rosé, enjoy the rosé. By the way, before I was being very makel in terms of the amount of the alcohol, the size of the cup. But let's say somebody is the opposite. They need a good wine. They're not skimping on the quality, they're not skimping on the alcohol content, and they're okay with an 8-ounce pour 4 times. Okay, then get what makes you happy. Okay. Now, just one thing: the first revius should be drank, without tiny sips. It doesn't have to be gulped down. The first revius. So again, the first 1.6 ounces, you swallow it, you drink it, and swallow. You don't tiny sip it. Afterwards, you can enjoy. You can sip a little bit. By the way, there's one thing I forgot. I wanted to say about karpas. Okay, but we'll get back. We'll get to the karpas soon. Number 12, should somebody else pour your wine? In the Shulchan Aruch, it's brought down somebody else should mix your wine. Talking about mixing. But even if you don't mix, you just pour, somebody else should pour it because it's a way of showing that you're an important person, you're a free person, like having a butler who pours your wine. Obviously, if you can afford a butler, and if you have non-mavushal, you have a Shomer Shabbos butler. Okay. He's got to do his own Seder. By the way, there were big, I remember there were Chabad Sedarim. When I was a kid growing up, the biggest Chabad Seder in the neighborhood was on Gailey Avenue in Westwood, Chabad of Westwood. And there would be just the staff, and many of them were Jewish, and the staff was like 40 people who would run, who would provide all the food and service. So one of the rabbis would have a Seder for the staff after the main Seder. Right? So, yeah. Schwartzy. Okay, number 13. Can you drink wine during dinner if you had nothing particularly in mind when you made kiddush? Let me explain to you what the question is. First of all, you shouldn't drink wine between the first cup and the second cup. I'm going to get into the reasons why, but it creates a problem because it just does. What about between the second cup? Second cup is the kiddush that you're going to right afterwards make motzi matzah, mar, and so on. Can you drink wine during the dinner? And the answer is yes, you can. But it's brought down the Shulchan Aruch that now it used to be that when you made kiddush, you covered all the drinking you'd have during the dinner automatically. But then it's brought down that at a later stage, people didn't drink as much. So if you wanted to cover all the drinking later, you had to have in mind that I'm going to be drinking later as well, and then you wouldn't have to make an additional hagafen during the meal. That's brought down Shulchan Aruch. But the answer is no. You don't have to worry. You don't have to have anything in mind anymore. It's it's self-understood in today's day and age that we serve wine at pretty much any occasion, any dinner, any yontif dinner. There's going to be wine there, whether you had it in mind or had nothing in mind. You are good to drink wine during the dinner without a hagafen. Okay, just drink it during the dinner. Now, number 14, where we get to we didn't talk about karpas. When you dip a potato or celery, some do an onion into. Did I hear somebody do watermelon? No. Into salt water, right? I don't know. Probably making it up. So there's the shita of the Rambam, and there's the shita that we do. The Rambam says you should do a shiur of a kazayas. We do less than a kazayas. The reason is there's no real necessity to eat it other than to get the kids to ask questions. So it doesn't need to be a kazayas. The problem is a lot of people are hungry. They call shul, put out some potatoes. They want to have 5 potatoes. So our minhag is not to have more than a kazayas, but what you could do is you could wait 5 minutes. You could have a little bit of a potato every 5-6 minutes. You just don't have them all in one swoop, and then you'd be covering that as well. And there are some people who even, I think Rabbi Moshe might have also, after dipping in water, maybe the second time, dip in a charosis as well. Very interesting minhag. And it's brought down that you should in Shulchan, that you should be mechaven, that you're going to be yotze the bracha on the maror as well, adama. You're not making a second adama when you eat maror. You might think, why would I? It's covered by the amotzi. But again, not for now. It isn't necessarily covered. So when you make the hadama on the karpas, have in mind that you're not going to make a second hadama on the maror half hour, an hour, 2 hours later when you have because again the karpas is before the agada, the maror is after the agada, after matzah. Okay, don't worry if you didn't get that. It's okay. Now, because the truth is, in today's day and age, we just assume Hamotzi covers everything. If you learn Gemara, it doesn't always cover everything, and that's one of those things that may not technically cover for whatever reason because it's not part of the real meal. Let's say, think of it as like a dessert, right? So it's not covered for a different reason, but the same principle. Number 15 is really a discussion about how to order the Seder plate. In this case, there's different shitas about how to order it. There's the Gra's version that's how Rabbi Moshe did, or some modified version of the Gra. I'm not going to explain it right now because it's too late. And there's the Arizal, which is very popular today. That's what I do. The Arizal's custom of how to order the Seder plate. But it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch that it has something to do with Ein Ma'avir Ala Mitzvos. Ein Ma'avir Ala Mitzvos has something to do with not passing over a mitzvah, which is strange. Like we don't want to insult this food over that food, the whole thing, right? So kind of similar to why we cover the matzah, but not the same, but similar, right? Why we cover challah or making kiddush. So Rabbi Moshe's custom was, if that's the whole reason why we made the kaira with things that set up the way they are, so then have some respect, and actually when you eat the different things, make sure to eat some of it from the actual kaira. So there's a custom, for example, a lot of people don't know this, to have an egg in memory of the chagiga after you've eaten the matzah and the korech, we dip it in salt water. So use the actual egg that's on the Seder table, on the kaira. Okay. The one thing we don't eat, does anybody who don't know what we don't eat from the kaira? The shank bone, because that's roasted. And custom amongst Ashkenazim, at least, I don't believe Spartan have the same thing. But we don't eat roasted chicken or meat because it might somehow be similar. Somebody might be confused of the roasting of the Pesach offering. A little bit of a stretch, but okay. Spartan don't have it. I don't know if they don't have the hang up that we have with it. I mean, there's easy ways of doing it. You add a little liquid to the pan, put some schmaltz in. Okay, got to finish up here because Meyer is in a minute. I just noticed. And should everyone have a Seder plate? It's number 16 at a public Seder with like 10 tables of the Kalba shows. No, we do it, but really only the Seder leader really needs a Seder plate. Number 17, how much more? Um, okay, a Kazayas, we'll get to that later. Now, more importantly is how much matzah. Okay, here's what's wild. This should be a shiur of itself. Rabbi Moshe would do everything he needed to do on the night of the Seder with one matzah. Now, there's three requirements to eat, plus a little bit during the meal, maybe. One is when you have motzi matzah the first time, and you're supposed to eat two kazesim. Now, many people think a kazayas is half a matzah or a quarter of a matzah, so two kazesim is a little over half a matzah. According to Rabbi Moshe, it was probably more like a fifth, maybe a fourth of a matzah. Okay, you want to be machmer, a fourth of a matzah. Rabbi Moshe didn't have measurements. The way you should measure it is with your eyes, not with rulers. But you should educate yourself beforehand to know what a kazayas is. So basically, think of a matzah. And you're going to have a fourth of it when you make the first two brachot of hamotzi and alachilas matzah. And then you're going to have a slightly smaller amount for the hillel sandwich. It could be a sixth, because it doesn't need to be two kazesim. It could be one. And then again, for the afikomen, it could be also two kazesim, which could be a fourth of a matzah. So a fourth of a matzah in the beginning, a sixth of the matzah for the kara sandwich, a fourth of the matzah at the end, and it leaves you a little bit during. These are tiny, tiny shiurim. These are big kulas. This will save you a massive stomach ache. Okay, it's worth the price of admission for this. And with that, we're going to conclude and break for Meyer.